This is Weekend Connection on the Bible Broadcasting Network. Nearly a third of the U.S. population provide care for a chronically ill, disabled, or aged family member or friend during any given year and spend an average of 20 hours per week providing care for their loved one. Our guest today shares her experiences of caregiving for several family members over a 17-year period of time. She tells of the most important lessons she learned and shares her favorite caregiving tips. So let's get connected. My guest today is Valerie Miller, who is a registered nurse but had to give up her career in order to stay home and nurse her relatives. Valerie, thank you for joining us today on Weekend Connection.
It's my privilege. Thank you for having me.
First of all, Valerie, I believe we need to define who a caregiver is, and if you would, tell us how many caregivers there are in the U.S. today.
A caregiver is anyone that is caring for a loved one or a friend. Caregivers, I primarily deal with caregivers in the sense of caring for the elderly, but the principles apply across the board to anyone that needs extra care. At this point in the U.S., it's estimated there are over 100 million caregivers. There are a lot of people needing care and giving care. You are a caregiver even if your family member is in your home, in a nursing home, or in an assisted living. You are still their caregiver.
Now, Valerie, your caregiving is rather unique, for you're attempting to provide care to more than one person, sometimes at the same time. Who are the people in your circle of care?
I was a caregiver for 17 years. My mother passed away, and I was immediately thrust into the role of caregiving for my grandmother and then eventually both my in-laws and my father. My father was the last one, and at one point, I had my mother-in-law upstairs and my father downstairs, and they both had bells. So that was when I learned most of my lessons that God wanted to teach me.
Valerie, since you have been on a long journey in caregiving, what is your goal and heart's desire in reaching out to other caregivers?
When I started my caregiving journey, I felt very isolated, very unprepared. I looked for books and things to read from a biblical perspective on caring for loved ones, for encouragement. I couldn't find anything. I found lots of the advice from the world says they've lived their life, put them in a nursing home and get on with your life. But that's not what God wants us to do. So over the next 20 years now, I have had an opportunity to present Sunday school series on caregiving from a biblical perspective. And then someone said, well, my wife's home and can't listen to it. Would you let me videotape it? So I have a DVD set that can be used for small group or in a personal setting. Caregivers don't have a lot of time to go to meetings, and so this DVD helps them. Then someone else came and said, would you put all of your information in a book? Write it in story form, write it in tell exactly what you went through and be very practical, but have it from a biblical perspective for encouragement. So my passion now that my caregiving at the moment is over is to reach out to other caregivers. It's a journey that you don't want to be on, but you wouldn't be anywhere else. And that's my heart now, is to reach out to other caregivers and encourage them. It's a path that we all will face, and my heart and my passion is to be that spiritual encouragement and practical tips for the caregiver.
Wonderful. Our guest today is Valerie Miller, and we're talking about biblical caregiving on Weekend Connection today. As you mentioned, Valerie, every caregiver needs someone to call when help is needed, but what if a caregiver refuses to reach out for help? How can that person be encouraged or helped so they don't become burned out?
You've got to have a network of help, of friends. It is very isolating. It's very difficult to not be too proud to ask for help. Right. I do have a web page that gives practical application and a monthly newsletter just to encourage the caregiver at biblicalcaregiving.com.
This is Weekend Connection on the Bible Broadcasting Network. and our guest is Valerie Miller. What is the number one question asked by caregivers, Valerie?
My number one question is always, how do I get my loved one to stop driving without them getting mad and having an argument and it becoming a major altercation? Your family physician can send a letter to the highway department, and the highway department will send a letter to your loved one and saying, it's time for you to come in and have your driving assessed. Then the loved one goes in, has the driving test. My husband's a family physician, and he has only had 2 in his 30-plus years that were able to pass the driving test. So the loved one has their car keys taken away, their license taken away, but they're mad at the highway department, not the family member and not the physician.
And what is the number 2 question asked by caregivers?
Number 2 is, someone asked me this early on, and I had to think for just a moment, what do you do when your loved one acts like a child? Do you argue with them? Do you reprimand them? Do you get mad? Do you get frustrated? The number one answer from God is treat them with respect. Respect for their position, not for how they're acting now. They are your parent or your grandparent. They are your loved one, and treat them with respect no matter how they act.
And this leads into a question that I have as we think about biblical caregiving with our guest, Valerie Miller. Valerie, I know there are people who sense that their father or mother should not be living alone anymore, but they won't move. I'm sure this has led to family discussions and even arguments. But what constructive things can they do to provide the care to that elderly parent? What are some ways to foster the relationships between the generations?
Absolutely. That is a great question. There are several reasons why loved ones won't move. One is they're familiar with everything where they are. They have their friends. They have their support network. Children, adult children, tend to forget that it's difficult to change. It's difficult to move to the unknown. And you're asking your parent to leave everything that they've known for the last 40, 50 years. To the adult children, it seems very selfish. They want their family member to have safe care. They want them to be near. But the parent or grandparent looks at it, you're trying to control me. You want me there because it's easier for you. It'll benefit you. What benefit will it be for me? Well, the adult child can talk to them and turn it around and say, would you be willing to move near me to help me out? You live so far away. I find it very difficult when something happens for me to drop everything and drive 4, 5, 10 hours, even across town, to come and do things for you. Would you be willing to help me by moving near me? And would you be willing to go and look at places to live? If it's not with you, it's perhaps in assisted living. Get them to feel like they're making the decision, not
Right.
you telling them what they have to do.
Right, absolutely. We're talking about biblical caregiving with Valerie Miller today on Weekend Connection. And Valerie, as we get into some practical tips, as the days get cooler, we must think about the elderly and keeping them warm. Are there practical ways of doing this without doubling the heating bill?
Yeah, absolutely. My father was always cold, and the body temperature regulator changes with the elderly. They begin to have store less fat, and so they get cold a lot easier. I found that for my father, he had a heated waterbed for a long time. He hated giving that up, but it got to the point where he couldn't get up out of the waterbed by himself. So we found a heated mattress pad that I put on low, made sure the controls were under the bed where he couldn't get to it and accidentally turn it on high. And it is washable, surprisingly. I also got a heated blanket and put on the bed at night. But then during the day, I'd take that blanket off and put it in his lap, and he loved it. He could be as warm as he wanted to be, no matter how hot or cool we had the house. So also warm fuzzy socks that have the rubber on the bottom. Sometimes they're hard to find, but those keep the feet warm, and sweatpants, sweaters, anything like that. But the electric heating blanket was the best thing, as long as you keep the controls out of reach.
Valerie, thank you for sharing that with us today on Week in Connection. And are there other caregiving tips you could share with our listeners?
I have a whole list of my favorite caregiver tips, tried and true. I have them listed in my book the book is called Who Cares? God's Path for the Caregiver. But my number one favorite caregiver tip, I don't know if anyone's gone into a nursing home or into a home where there's a bedside commode. They always smell. So we found that a cap full of Listerine in the bedside commode kills bacteria and smells great. Anything else was too strong. We tried bleach, we tried Pine Sol, we tried those different things. And then we came up with the Listerine. We went to the dollar store and got the cheap generic brand of mouthwash. Peppermint was what my father liked, and used a cap full of that every time we rinsed out the bedside commode, and it was great. When my father was taking, and my mother-in-law, when they would take a bath or a shower, another thing that they really, really appreciated was me putting their clothes and the towel in the clothes dryer to warm it up. I tried doing it in the microwave, and that was not a good idea. It burned a hole in my father's pajamas. But warming the clothes in the dryer helps a lot so that they don't get chilled when they get out. Another tip, my father loved his morning coffee, but it got to where he really needed more nutrition. So I got the chocolate boost or Ensure, and I heated that up in the microwave, and he said that satisfied his morning cup of coffee and gave him the extra nutrition he needed.
Valerie, as we conclude today's program, what would you like for caregivers to learn from your website and Facebook page, as well as your material?
My primary goal for all of this is to reach out to other caregivers so that they know they're not alone. The last 2 years I was caring for my father, I was home 24/7. My husband even did the grocery shopping. Said he was intimidated by all the women first, but now he can go anywhere he wants in that grocery store. So caregivers can be very isolating. It can be overwhelming. It can be frustrating. I want them to know that there is help, there is hope, and my material can encourage them, can give them understanding and tips, practical tips, as well as spiritual tips on how to be the caregiver that God wants them to be. And I want them to know that they're not alone. And the things that they're feeling, it's okay. Others have felt the same way and do feel the same way. And I welcome anyone that wants to call or email or Facebook anytime anyone wants to get in touch with me if they need someone to talk to. I'm a good person to talk to because I don't know any of their friends, and they can tell me anything they want. And sometimes you just need someone to listen.
Right. So remind us of your website and how they can connect with your Facebook page.
Yes, my website it's very easy. It's biblicalcaregiving.com, and the Facebook page is also Biblical Caregiving. And there's contact information on phone numbers and addresses and email on the website, and find the encouragement, the practical tips, and the spiritual encouragement to be the caregiver God wants them to be.
And that was biblicalcaregiving.com. Thank you for joining us on Week in Connection today, Valerie. May the Lord continue to bless you as you continue to walk with Him in your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.